It was supposed to be a fun day of fishing for three young men at Lake Ray Hubbard. Instead, it turned deadly after the group jumped in to swim, and 18-year-old Daniel Erving never resurfaced. Now, months.
A 19-year-old sat down with detectives in April and admitted, on the record, to deleting every text message between himself and a dead teenager, to fleeing the scene, and to telling a minor to throw that teenager's phone out a moving car. He wasn't arrested until July. That's a 2-month gap between a confession and a pair of handcuffs, and tonight we're going to count exactly what filled it, then set that case next to a second one, in a different state, with the same attorney and the same uncomfortable shape. This is true crime evidence. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss stories like this one. You already know who Daniel Erving and Nolan were. You already know neither of them came home. So we're not spending 10 minutes rebuilding a timeline you're already living inside. What we're doing tonight is putting the new documents, the new arrests, and the new contradictions from the last 10 days side by side, in both cases, and asking the same question of each. In the hours after these two young men disappeared, did the people around them act like witnesses, or like people with something to hide? Let's start with Erving, because that's where the paperwork actually is. July 8th, a warrant affidavit is stamped in Dallas County. July 9th, Lucas Rohr, 19, is arrested. The same day, a juvenile suspect is taken into custody, both charged with tampering with physical evidence, a third-degree felony. That's what cracked this case open after nearly 3 months of silence. Here's the detail that should stop you. According to that affidavit, Rohr sat down for a voluntary interview with Dallas police back in late April. He confirmed he knew an investigation into Daniel's death was coming and that he didn't want to get in trouble. He admitted to deleting every text between himself and Daniel. He admitted to fleeing the scene. He admitted to instructing the juvenile to throw Daniel's phone out of the car window. All of that in late April. The affidavit wasn't stamped until July 8th. The arrest didn't happen until July 9th. Count that gap. More than 2 months between a young man confessing on the record to destroying evidence and disposing of a dead teenager's belongings, and the moment anyone put him in handcuffs. CNN asked Dallas police why it took that long. As of this recording, they haven't received an answer. Here's what's on paper. Rohr was booked and granted a $10,000 bond. Here's what isn't on paper yet. Daniel's family is demanding murder charges, rejecting the current tampering charge, and calling on the Dallas County DA's office to present the evidence to a grand jury and pursue whatever charges the facts actually support. According to the medical examiner's report, Daniel surfaced once, called out, went under, and didn't resurface, after which the other two disposed of his belongings and never reported the incident. The examiner wrote on June 29th that despite initial suspicions, there's no current suspicion of foul play. That's the official position, accidental drowning. But the family's attorneys are pointing at what happened next, because the sequence described in the affidavit tells its own story. After Daniel went under, the two fled in Rohr's car, threw his clothing into a tree line near the bridge, and got rid of his phone out the window. Detectives found every message between Rohr and Daniel had been deleted. Police say Rohr admitted to erasing them once he realized an investigation was coming. Think about the mechanics of that for a second. That's not one decision. It's a sequence. Gather the clothes, throw them into a tree line, get in the car, instruct someone else to get rid of the phone, drive away, then separately open your own phone and delete every conversation with the person you just watched go under. Does that look like panic, or does that look like a plan? That's the exact question the family's legal team is pressing, not rhetoric. Crump laid it out plainly. 2 young men picked Daniel up, went to the lake, came back without him, discarded his phone and clothes, deleted their messages, and waited days before telling anyone he had drowned. A friend, in Crump's words, would not have thrown away his clothes, would not have thrown away his phone, would not have deleted his messages. Daniel's mother, Tama Erving, described the arrests as partial justice, said her son went by Mike, and called him her guardian angel. To be fair, it's unclear whether Rohr or the juvenile have retained attorneys able to speak on their behalf, and attempts to reach either have been unsuccessful. There's no defense position on the record here, no counter-narrative. What we have is Rohr's own account in the affidavit that he panicked. Whether the full sequence he's alleged to have carried out actually fits inside that word is something a jury may eventually have to weigh. Here's where this case forks into 2 separate questions. Whether Daniel drowned accidentally is one question, and the medical examiner has answered it. Whether the 2 people with him had any obligation to call for help, preserve the scene, or contact his family, and whether failing to do any of that amounts to something beyond evidence tampering is a completely different question, and right now only the first one has an official answer. Dominique Alexander, of the Next Generation Action Network, said in an open letter to Dallas police that the family believes the urgency they asked for wasn't met in the investigation's earliest stages. That delay sits at the center of this. Not just the 2 months between interview and arrest, but the 4 days Daniel's body lay at the bottom of Lake Ray Hubbard while, according to investigators, the 2 people who watched him go under went to school and lived their lives. The family's legal team has also pushed back on the accidental drowning framing itself, noting Daniel was a skilled member of his high school swim team. That's Erving as it stands. Tampering charges filed, the family pushing for a grand jury, no defense statement on record, and a community waiting to see whether the Dallas County DA moves forward. Now, Nolan Wells, where 3 pieces of evidence from the last 10 days change the shape of what we're looking at. The first is the GPS data, obtained by CBS News from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, tracking the boat that carried Nolan to Horn Island on July 4th. It left dock around 9:56 that morning, reached the island at 11:14. According to Crump's office, Nolan was last seen on the island at 3 o'clock. The GPS data shows the boat didn't leave Horn Island until 4:31. That's a 90-minute gap between when his friends say they last saw him and when the boat actually moved, and nobody has publicly explained what filled it. It gets stranger from there. The boat didn't stay parked once it reached the mainland. It went out again into Fort Bayou around 5:52, back at the dock by 6:06, then out a third time to the Fort Bayou boat launch around 7:19, before being towed overland to the owner's residence in Biloxi. Why take the boat out twice more, to a different waterway, after returning from an island where your friend is missing? Those aren't rhetorical questions. They're the questions investigators are actually sitting with. The second piece is the towing call audio. Around 4 o'clock, a dispatcher asked the caller whether everyone on board was okay. Yeah, everybody is on board, the caller said, giving a head count of 7. The operator told the dispatcher the bilge pump had failed at the west tip of Horn Island, and that the boat was taking on water. Sit with that for a second. If Nolan had already separated from the group at 3 o'clock, what does everybody is on board mean at 4 o'clock? There are a few possibilities. The caller could have meant everyone currently aboard. He may have been speaking loosely, not thinking about Nolan in that moment. Or, and this is the one the family is pressing, he meant exactly what he said, and something doesn't add up. Crime scene investigator Cheryl McCullum has said this data will be key to verifying the boys' accounts, since those accounts were given before the tracking records went public. If their story doesn't match completely with what the boat actually did, in her words, they're going to have a problem. The third piece is the contradiction Crump has repeatedly pointed to. According to Katie, Nolan told her he was heading back to his friend's boat. According to the friends, Nolan told them he was staying behind with Katie. Both cannot be accurate. Somebody isn't telling the truth, and that contradiction sits at the exact center of this investigation, because if Nolan intended to get back on that boat, the question of why he didn't becomes an entirely different question than the version where he chose to stay. Tristan Shepard, who was on the trip, has told ABC News that the voice shouting in the widely shared video clip is his own, not Nolan's, and that Nolan doesn't appear in that footage at all, saying plainly that the group cared about Nolan and never wanted any harm to come to him. To be fair, Shepard has cooperated with investigators and made public statements denying wrongdoing. That's on the record. But cooperation and clarity aren't the same thing, and right now the GPS, the towing call, and the Katie contradiction are 3 data points that don't resolve into one clean story no matter which direction you read them from. Sheriff Ledbetter has confirmed the FBI is assisting his office in examining the digital evidence, which he says isn't unusual since Horn Island sits on federal land. Investigators have interviewed the 3 friends who were with Nolan and more than 60 additional witnesses. His cause of death hasn't been released, and both autopsy and toxicology results remain pending. Now let's put these 2 cases next to each other, because the pattern that shows up isn't about the water. It's about the phone, in both cases, literally. In Erving's case, per the affidavit, the phone was thrown out a car window, and the messages on Rohr's own device were deleted. The digital trail was scrubbed, and 4 days passed before anyone outside those 2 people knew Daniel was gone. Now turn to Wells. Nolan's phone wasn't recovered with his body. It stayed aboard the boat. But here's what makes this different from simply leaving a phone behind. Christine tracked it using Life 360 and found the location it showed didn't match what Snapchat was showing for the same device. Two apps, reading the same phone, giving different answers. That's either a technical glitch or evidence the phone was handled in a way that produced conflicting data, and nobody has publicly resolved which. It gets worse from there. When the family got the phone back, Christine and her sister went through both of Nolan's Snapchat accounts. Both were empty, nothing from July 4th, no photos, no video, and she said publicly it hadn't even been 24 hours. The window Snapchat content typically survives before it disappears on its own. She knew her son. He used that app constantly, especially when he was having fun. This time there was nothing. To be clear, Snapchat content does disappear by design, and a full forensic exam of the device would be needed before anyone can say whether this content was manually deleted or simply expired on its own. Attorney John Mobley has cautioned exactly that on a legal commentary program. Nancy Grace was considerably more direct, saying she has a real problem with the Life 360 data and the phone data simply not lining up. Notice the shape here. In Erving's case, the phone evidence is what led directly to tampering charges. In Wells's case, the phone evidence hasn't led to charges yet, but the shape is identical. A young man's digital footprint, the record of where he was and who he was talking to, either destroyed or disrupted in the hours after he disappeared, in both cases. McCullum raised a second point that hasn't gotten enough attention. There were reportedly hundreds of people on Horn Island that day. She said plainly that how somebody didn't see him is pretty shocking to her, especially if he left one group that knew him to go with another group that also knew him, adding that she doesn't understand how he got separated from everyone he knew. That's not speculation. That's a crime scene investigator looking at the physical reality. An 18-year-old, 6'1", a football player, surrounded by hundreds of people on a holiday, and saying the math doesn't work. Then the video surfaced. Footage obtained by TMZ, recorded during the July 4th gathering, pans across a scene packed with boats and partygoers before landing on a man standing on the back deck of a vessel, appearing to bend down. The clip never shows his face, but the outlet noted his trunks matched the color of the ones Nolan was photographed wearing with friends earlier that day, on a boat anchored in what looked like neck-deep water. Per the GPS data, Nolan's friend's boat didn't leave the island until roughly 2 hours after that footage was recorded. No one has publicly come forward with a confirmed sighting of Nolan after that point. Whether that footage is actually him hasn't been confirmed, but it's now with investigators, and it's a potential data point in a timeline that otherwise has almost nothing between 3 o'clock that afternoon and the moment his body was found 2 days later. Here's why it matters against the towing call. If that footage shows Nolan on a different boat around 2:30, and the towing call at 4 o'clock has the caller saying everyone was accounted for, did the friends on that boat know where Nolan actually was, or didn't they? And if they didn't, why say everyone was on board? There are innocent explanations for that, and less innocent ones, and right now nobody outside the investigation knows which applies. Investigators have specifically requested original, unedited photos and video from July 4th, particularly anything depicting altercations or believed to include Nolan. That's precise language. They're not asking for general footage. They're asking for footage of altercations, and footage of him specifically. That tells you something about where they're looking, even if it doesn't tell you what they've found. Crump has drawn this comparison himself, saying both young men died under highly questionable circumstances, and he's now pressing both cases with the same framework. Independent investigations, independent autopsies, sustained public pressure. And what each family is actually asking for isn't quite what you'd assume. Tama Erving isn't asking for a conviction outright. She's asking the Dallas County DA to present the evidence to a grand jury and let it decide whether the charges should go beyond tampering. Her attorney, Sean Deridia, has said to follow the facts wherever they lead and bring whatever charges are appropriate, including but not limited to murder. A DA spokesperson has said the office hasn't received the case yet, which is standard this soon after an arrest. Christine Wansley, for her part, has said from the very beginning that all she wants is to know what happened and why her son didn't come home. An honest, thorough investigation, nothing more specific than that. Nolan's cause and manner of death haven't been officially released. 2 autopsies are underway, the state's and the independent one Crump commissioned, with results expected soon. The coroner has said there were no immediately obvious signs of foul play or trauma, but that a full autopsy was ordered given the uncertain circumstances. No charges have been filed. No suspects named. On Monday, July 20th, Nolan was laid to rest at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs. Sharpton officiated. Crump delivered a call for justice. Christine thanked God for 18 years with her son and described him as having a gentle, calming spirit who dreamed of one day having 3 daughters. His teammates attended in uniform. His coach called him the kind of son, teammate, and student every program hopes for. Sharpton noted the multiracial crowd filling the church and pledged a $50,000 reward for new information, which Tyler Perry matched, bringing the total to $100,000 at that point. Kaepernick covered the independent autopsy's cost. Crump told mourners to do for Nolan Wells whatever they'd do for their own child if that child had been on that boat. Let's be precise about where both cases actually stand. In Erving's case, the medical examiner has ruled the death an accidental drowning. 2 people are charged with evidence tampering. The family is pushing for a grand jury and murder charges. The DA hasn't received the case yet. In Wells's case, no cause of death has been released, no charges filed, 2 autopsies pending, the FBI assisting, and investigators actively seeking footage and witnesses from July 4th. Both families share the same attorney. Both have commissioned independent investigations, and both are asking for the same fundamental thing, not a verdict, a process, an investigation that treats their son's life as though it mattered as much as anyone else's. Daniel Erving was 18. He went by Mike. He was an honor roll student and a swimmer. His mother called him her guardian angel. Nolan Wells was 18. He played wide receiver. He had a gentle, calming spirit, and he wanted 3 daughters. 2 families buried their sons. 2 sets of friends who were there that day have given accounts that, against the evidence now available, don't fully hold together. 2 phones that should have told the story of what happened are either gone or compromised. And one question sits underneath both cases. In the hours right after, did the people around these 2 young men act like witnesses, or like people with something to hide? The GPS data has its answers. The dispatch audio has its answers. The affidavit has its answers. The full truth is still out there, and when the independent autopsy in the Wells case comes back, this story may shift again. We're going to keep following both of these cases until there are real answers, not theories. If this is the kind of reporting you want, sourced, verified, nothing added for shock value, subscribe. We'll bring you the facts as we actually get them, and not a moment before.